Here we're going to talk about factoring quadratics when the lead coefficient is anything other than 1. And so if we look at these examples here, the lead coefficient, or the number right before x squared, well, in this case it's 3. In the second example, the lead coefficient, the number before x squared, is negative 2. And so that's what we're going to attack today, is how do we factor these types of situations. So first let's start reviewing one of our easier examples where the lead coefficient actually is just 1. So if we look at this example right here, it looks like there's nothing in front of the x squared, and when there's nothing in front of it, there's actually an invisible 1. Okay, so now to do our factoring diamond, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the number that is last, or the number with no x or variable after it, and I'm going to stick that on the top of my diamond, and then I'm going to take the number in the middle, or the number that has x or one variable right after it. Okay, and then what I'm looking for is two numbers that will multiply to the top and add to the bottom. So if I chose 3 and 4, well, 3 times 4 would get me to 12, and then 3 plus 4 would get me to 7. So 3 and 4 are kind of like my magic numbers there. And so now all I need to do is set up my double parentheses that it's going to factor into, because it's going to be in factored form now. And it's each going to start with an x, and I'm kind of thinking, well, x times x gets me to x squared, so that looks good. And then all I do is I put my magic numbers there, so 3 and 4, and it was a positive 3 and a positive 4, and so I am done. And if you wanted to do a double check, all you have to do is double distribute it, or you could FOIL, and FOIL it back out. So if I go x times x, x squared, x times 4 is 4x, and then I'm going to distribute this positive 3 here to these as well. And so when I do that, that's going to be a 3x, and then plus 3 times 4 is 12, and then don't forget your like terms there. And then so we have plus 7x plus 12, and oh yeah, that's exactly where I started. So what that means is x squared plus 7x plus 12 is the same as x plus 3 times x plus 4. Now let's jump back into this setup and just examine it a little bit further. So what we said before is all I did is I just took the last number and I kind of like threw it on top here, right? And then I took the middle number and threw it on bottom. And that is kind of what we did. But now if we're going to investigate what happens when the leading coefficient is something other than 1, then let's go ahead and just check out what's happening when that lead coefficient is still 1. So what actually happens for this top value in my diamond is I'm actually taking the first number, the lead coefficient, and I'm multiplying it by the last number. So I'm going to go 1 times 12 to get to that top value in my diamond. And if I think of that in that way, then that's really going to help me to know what to do when that lead coefficient is not 1, because it kind of just didn't really matter. I didn't really need to multiply by 1 in that case because I will still end up with 12. However, if I look at an example like this where my lead coefficient is something other than 1, like say 2, then let's go ahead and take a look at this same idea here. So I'm going to make my diamond, and then for the top, it's not going to be just the top value, but the top is going to be the first times the last. And so I'm going to go 2 times negative 12, which is going to get me to negative 24. And then it's still that middle number that goes on the bottom, so I still have a 5 down here. Okay, and then so that's the only difference so far. And now I need to come up with those two numbers that multiply to the top and add to the bottom. So it seems like maybe something like 8 and 3, because 8 times 3 is 24, and the difference would be 5. And I'm just going to think, what would be negative here? Well, how about 8 and then plus negative 3 would get me to positive 5, and 8 times negative 3 is negative 24. Okay, so now I'm just going to go ahead and set up these double parentheses. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put my magic numbers. So we have a positive 8 and then a negative 3. Okay, now there's only one other time that we use this lead coefficient. So remember, the first time we used it is to multiply to get to that top value in your diamond. Here's the second time we're going to use it. We're going to divide our magic numbers by that lead coefficient. So I'm going to divide those magic numbers by the lead coefficient. So now I have x plus, well, 8 divided by 2 is 4. Okay, and then one last thing to remember here. If it does not divide evenly, like this case does not divide evenly and it can't be simplified at all, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that number that is on the denominator and I'm going to move it out front. So it's going to become 2x minus 3. And that is my factored form. Okay, and then by the way, we can write it in either orientation. So 2x minus 3 times x plus 4 is just fine. And if you don't believe me that it's the same as what we started with, then go ahead and FOIL it out or double distribute it out, and you will see that you will get back to exactly where we started. Let's go ahead and do another example here. So first thing I might notice is that my lead coefficient is 3. It's not 1. So that means I'm going to need kind of this extended process. And so what's going to go on the top of my diamond is going to be 3 times negative 2. So 3 times negative 2 is negative 6. And then that same middle number is just going to go on the bottom just like it always does. Okay, now I'm looking for my two magic numbers that multiply to the top and add to the bottom. So maybe how about like negative 6 and positive 1? So negative 6 times positive 1, that's negative 6, yep. Negative 6 plus 1, that's negative 5. Okay, I'm looking good. All right, go ahead and set up my double parentheses here. Okay, so now I've got an x and an x. And then I'm going to go ahead and write out those magic numbers. So I have a negative 6. And by the way, I'm just kind of thinking ahead and leaving a little bit of space below them. So I have a negative 6 and then a positive 1. And then here, I need to make sure that I remember, oh yeah, what was that lead coefficient? It was 3. So here's the second time that I use that lead coefficient. I divide my magic numbers by that lead coefficient. Okay? Okay, so now let's see what we have here. So now I have x minus, well, 6 divided by 3, well, that's just 2, okay? Okay, and then over here, let's check out what's happening. So I have a fraction that cannot simplify. So there's nothing I can do to simplify it. And so once it's already fully simplified, if I still have a denominator, then that denominator has to come out in front of the x. So now that guy comes out right there, and I now have 3x plus 1. Okay, and that is my final factored form. And you can also write it as 3x plus 1 times x minus 2, and either of those are fine. And if we were to multiply either of these guys out, you would get back to where you started.